The science behind food preservation primarily focuses on inhibiting the growth of microorganisms that cause spoilage by manipulating factors like temperature, moisture content, potential of hydrogen level, and adding preservative, essentially creating an environment unfavorable for bacteria and other microbes to thrive. Common preservation methods include refrigeration, freezing, canning, hydration, salting, sugaring, and fermentation, each utilizing different mechanisms to achieve this goal. We have been preserving our foods for centuries. Salting, for instance, is one of the earliest recognized forms of food preservation. We preserve food to extend its life shelf. This is because food is perishable. It will be off if it isn't eaten in time or preserved. It needs special care to last as long as possible and maintain its natural, nutritional, and natural value. There are several ways that food can be preserved. Into this block, we look at 7 food preservation method. When done correctly, this method extends the shelf life of our food and its quality. Essentially, food preservation is the process of treating and handling food to stop or significantly slow down spoilage. Through food preservation, we also prevent foodborne illnesses and maintain the nutritional value, taste, and texture of food products. The main reason we preserve food is to keep it safe before consumption and because we want to eat satisfying food. And we have many other reasons why we should preserve food, and one of the reasons is because of bacterial growth. If the conditions are right, warm, moist, and on time, bacteria like Salmonella and E. coli have a field day. Preservation method, even simple ones like refrigeration, can really reduce the likelihood of bacteria growth and food spoilage. And next thing we also need to look at the quality, the quality of that food, and then the taste, the smell, and many other things. And to be appetizing, the food needs to look, smell, feel, and most importantly, taste good. So if it doesn't, we look for food that tick all these boxes. The odd bruise or dent is often harmless, but food must be in its best quality for us to want it. And then we also look at the wastage aspect of it. Most of the time we tend to waste food, and I know that a lot of people have this mentality of just wasting food. So one thing preservation does to the food is it keeps it. Like when we talk about refrigerating the food, no matter how much food you have left after eating, most of the time when you are satisfied, the best way to keep your food than keeping it in the microwave, because there are a lot of times I've seen people after eating, they will just keep it in the microwave, but then we tend to forget that there is heat, there's a lot of instances, or would I say factors, that can cause spoilage when you keep your food in that kind of space. So advisably, it's better you refrigerate the food, and then when you're ready to eat it, then you can microwave it, or then you can just warm it and then eat. So we waste food a tremendous amount of food. According to a recent study by the World Wildlife Fund and British retailer Tesco, an eye-watering 2.5 billion tons of food is wasted globally, with 2.3 billion people being moderately or severely methane gas. Food that is wasted in landfill accounts for about 8% of global emissions. Hello and welcome to another episode here on Launch Global. Today we'll be looking at the understanding the science behind preservation method. I am Chung Anamel Joseph. We'll return shortly after the break, and then by that time we're going to be looking at more about this. You're welcome back from the break, and if you're just catching up with us today on Lunch Global, today we'll be looking at understanding the science behind preservation method. And when we talk about that, we talk about food. The most common method used either to kill or to reduce the growth of microorganisms are the application of heat, the removal of water, the lowering of temperature during storage, the reduction of potential of hydrogen, the control of oxygen and carbon dioxide concentration, and the removal of nutrients needed for growth. Understanding the current method for preserving food at home is critical to ensure a safe product for you and your family. When preserving food, first, you need to decide what you want to preserve and then find a research-based recipe which will tell you what preservation method to use. And this method, we have a lot of them. Earlier on, I mentioned a couple of those preservation methods. For the heating, it's one of the most common way to preserve our food. Let's take, for instance, maybe when you have maybe beef, goat meat, turkey, chicken, and maybe you want, instead of putting it in the refrigerator or freezing it, you always prefer to, boil it because you feel like, oh, if I boil it and keep it, it's going to last a little bit longer. Now, other methods include sugaring. You know that there are food that when you're preserving them, like the best preservation for them is sugaring. Now, we don't use all preservation method for all food. Every other thing have their own ways you can preserve them, and we don't get to understand and know the idea behind all of this, because we tend to feel like, oh, just because salt is good, if I wash my vegetable with salt, it's perfect, it has to be salt for literally everything. Now, there are some things that it is not salt that is the best method of preservation, and you tend to look at, okay, if you use maybe salt to preserve something, there's a moment where you use salt to preserve another thing and it doesn't work as perfectly as the other one. So there are different preservation method for different things and for different reason. Now, when it comes to like sugaring, we know preserving food with lots of sugar reduce its water content. It limits bacterial growth. Sugar can be in granola, sugar syrup, honey, or molasses. Fruits like a lot of fruit like orange, lemon. When you're preserving your lemon, it is very, very good for you too. For instance, maybe when you have like a cut of your lemon, the best way you can preserve it is just to add sugar on it. Trust me, it's going to come back very fresh, very good, and it's not even going to dry. But before we go even deeper into this, let's just take a quick break. We'll return shortly. vegetable preservation. This method removes moisture from food. Removing moisture from the product reduces the ability of bacterial growth by taking away the elements it needs to grow. In some areas of the world, it is difficult to keep food safe as a dehydrated product due to humidity. If humidity is an issue, it may be best to dehydrate the food and then freeze it to keep bacteria from growing. Keeping dehydrated food in airtight containers is beneficial to maintaining dehydration level required to keep food safe. And you know, the hydration method, obviously, I said it, is the process of removing water. Let's take, for instance, you want to preserve tomatoes, and it's right there on the screen. You know, most of the time you have so much of it and then you don't want to keep it to spoil, or maybe because of the light issue, maybe the light is not really consistent. The best method you can use in this instance is for you to slice your tomatoes and then maybe allow the water to drain. You can sun dry it. Most of the time people sun dry it when it comes, for instance, like fish, let me say dry catfish, you know. It's like most of the time they use the hydration method first to have form and all that before, because you cannot try to, you know, just start smoking it when it's very still have water in it. So the first thing you need to do, or they do, is to dehydrate the fish first, then they smoke it out. But then this is one of the best form of preservation in an airtight container, and you can always use it as long as you deem fit, except if you just want to throw it away at the end of the day. But when it's properly dehydrated, it lasts so long and you can use it any day, anytime. And if you notice, when it comes to this dehydration method as well, you have let me use the word dried. You have dried fruits. There are a lot of dry fruits that people use. We all use it sometimes, you know, and then when you have them there, they can last for as long as you want. Maybe when it's exposed to like humidity, now it starts having like fungi on it, and then it becomes soft, and that's what spoils it. But ideally, after doing this, using this method, you can also can it, or let me say put it in an airtight container, and then it lasts longer. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to be taking so much, but then when we come to our next episode, I'm going to be talking more about this particular preservation method, because it is very important to each and every one, because you know, food can be just super expensive, and the weather is really like, you know, hot. The weather has changed, so if you don't get to preserve your food so well, it gets to spoil, and then don't forget, I say you end up wasting money, wasting food, which we do not advise here. Now, the next method you can use is canning, which I say you can dehydrate and still can. This method of food preservation removes oxygen from foods. The food stored in an airtight, acidic, high salt or sugar environment prevents bacteria from growing. Canned food must be handled hygienically and be of good quality. Jars should be specifically designed for canning. This is to ensure that they will be airtight. You need to be careful with this particular food preservation method though. This is because the C. botulinum bacteria thrive in environments absent of oxygen. Suppose the canning process you use hasn't been successfully tried and tested. In this case, the bacterium can start to grow and produce toxins. These toxins can lead to botulism poisoning, a rare but life-threatening condition. So if you're using this particular method, it is very fragile. It is very fragile. So you have to be, you know, as clean as possible. Your hands need to be very neat. The can needs to be very neat. The container needs to be the cover needs to be very neat, and where you're packaging it needs to be very neat, because any moment where, like, you know, there's a slip in it and then you mistake to have not package it very well, now it tends to grow bacteria, and then these toxins are very harmful to the body. So if using this particular method, you just know what to do. You have to be careful when doing this. Another method is pickling. Now, this is a method of preservation that has a high concentration of acid. Pickled products are saturated with acids to help with the preservation pH of the food. Heat treating this product using a water bath or steam canning method is still needed to kill any chance of potential bacterial growth that may remain in the jar. And then it is almost the same thing as canning. Now the jar is where the most the focus is mainly, because the idea is for you to protect bacterial growth, to preserve the food, to make sure it's safe to consume and all of that. So your jar needs to be properly washed, and this is where at the same time we bring in salt. Sometimes it's good for you to use salt, apple cider, to make sure that you are washing your vegetables very, very well, right? So in this instance, you can use warm water and salt to wash your jar and make sure that it is super clean before preserving whatever it is that you want to preserve using this pickling method. And another method is vacuum packing. Vacuum packing is very common because, let me make an instant Ziploc bag. Yeah, so, most of the time I use this particular method, especially when I want to preserve my cucumbers, my vegetables, my peppers, my tomatoes, my chicken, like a lot of things. I am such a big fan of vacuum packing, and I put them and I freeze them. Some of them I just put them in the refrigerator just to be chilled, while some of them, like the tomatoes, the pepper, most of the time I put them in the deep freezer. So vacuum packing extends the shelf life of certain food by soaking out oxygen to limit the growth of microorganisms. A benefit of vacuum packing is that it also preserves food quality without adding other ingredients, as you do with canning. So vacuum packing food properties such as its smell and taste remain intact. Again, this method must be done carefully to prevent C. botulinum from growing. At the same time, it has to be clean. Anytime you pack your vacuum or your Ziploc bag, and then you have to, even if it's still in the carton or properly kept, you never know what has settled on it in any way and manner. So one thing you need to also do is to make sure that it is super clean. Always rinse it with water to make sure that it is clean. And then last on my list basically is salting. I think I still have other ones. I still have freezing and all of that, but then salting is super common. Freezing is also very common, but it is also very important. Salting is excellent for drawing water out of certain food. This like sugaring, stop bacteria from growing. Wet curing is when salt is mixed with water and sometimes sugar. Food is added to this mixture and placed in a can. Dry curing is where salt is put directly onto food like meat. This draws out water. So if you are using salt maybe on a dry, let's take for instance, right, the meat on the screen, you can put in salt, and people will be like, wouldn't the meat be too salty? No, you're not keeping it in a place where you are keeping it and allowing it to get all the snow. You're not trying to salt it. You're basically trying to put the salt so that it drains the water very well. Then you preserve it. You're not marinating the meat, don't forget. And most of the time, if you're preserving meats like this, I think big restaurants, big hotels usually do that. They salt it to drain out the water before preserving it. And last on my list, sorry, I mentioned that earlier, but then let's just take this, freezing. And this method is super quick, easy, and probably the most affordable method of food preservation. Many food can be frozen without disruption of flavor, color, and nutritional value. Freezing slows growth of enzymes but does not eliminate them. When food is removed from the freezer, microorganisms begin to grow once they reach a thawed state. So it is important to thaw all food in the refrigerator to keep them safe. When it comes to home food preservation, recommendations and method have changed through the years. To keep yourself and your family safe when practicing home preservation, be sure to use research